He's the scary guy at the restaurant, the one Columbo talks to in that dim hallway, the ominous voice on the phone. An obscure individual, almost a background character, but not quite. Always a little something else, a flash of unique personality. He pops up again and again, different faces, but always the same name. I'll come right out and say it. Sergeant Burke is Lieutenant Columbo's ideal right-hand man. Like Columbo, he's known only by his rank and his last name. And like Columbo, we have to wonder how much of what we see is genuine and how much is an elaborate facade. But unlike Columbo, we must ask a critical question. Does this man even exist? Today on Echoes of Columbo, we look at Burke, the unknown sergeant. Playing second fiddle to Columbo on a murder investigation can be a taxing affair. Few men have the luck or the patience to work with him more than once. Even in such rare company, Sergeant Burke stands out. What makes him unique is that Columbo seems to let him in on the real tactics of the investigations. Other sergeants are usually kept in the dark as much as the murderer, baffled by why their boss is wasting time with pointless details. But we often see Burke participating in elaborate pantomimes meant to keep suspected killers off balance, and seeming to know, along with Columbo and the audience, exactly who the culprit is. More than being a prop to showcase the lieutenant's brilliance, we get the sense that Burke is a confidant and co-combatant. And yet he enjoys a low standing with fans. Why? Well, he's something of an oddity. He never gets a spotlight episode. Heck, he barely gets a spotlight scene. Unless you dig deep, and we're gonna dig deep here, baby, you're not likely to unearth anything particularly interesting about him. Another thing that might account for Burke's anonymity is that he's very much a Richard Allen Simmons character, appearing in 6 of 11 Simmons-produced episodes. As such, he's tied to that distinct interpretation of the Columbo character. More confusing is the fact that he's played by 3 different actors. Todd Martin in the Bye Bye Sky High IQ murder case where he wears a raincoat, and Murder Under Glass. Jerome Guardino, who has a mustache in Try and Catch Me and Make Me a Perfect Murder, but does not have a mustache in Murder, Smoke and Shadows, and Stuart Zully in a dark trench coat in Sex and the Married Detective. Each actor brings a different flair to the role. Martin's interpretation is an intimidating heavy, openly hostile to the murderers. Guardino plays the part as a competent yet oft-exasperated career man. Zully's only outing is somewhere in the middle, taking Martin's trench coat and Guardino's put-upon patience. Every incarnation of the character holds low-level conversations with Columbo while the murderer looks on. Martin does it to great effect in Murder Under Glass. Guardino does it in Try and Catch Me. Zully does it in Sex and the Married Detective. Look how, in each instance, the murderers strain to hear while pretending they're not straining to hear. Both Guardino and Zully seem more aware of Columbo's eccentricities. In Try and Catch Me and Make Me a Perfect Murder, Burke is seen humoring his boss.
That's very good, Lieutenant. His nose, Lieutenant?
It's very nice, Lieutenant.
That's very interesting, Lieutenant.
In Sex and the Married Detective, Columbo passes his cigar-befouled coffee to Burke, who quickly passes it off to another officer. And the character is oddly tied to the telephone. In his first appearance, an unseen Sergeant Klein summons the murderer to a rendezvous with Burke and Columbo. In How to Dial a Murder, in which he does not actually appear, Columbo refers to Burke receiving a phone call.
According to Sergeant Burke, Miss Nichols called in her report just after 3 o'clock.
In his last appearance, Burke himself makes the cryptic call that lures Dr. Allenby to the clinic. Note how both calls are made on ominously dark and stormy nights. So there is a consistency of sorts. My initial thought was that, despite the multiple actors, Burke is always the same man, just tailoring his act each time to keep the suspects off balance, like the lieutenant himself does. But consider this. Jerome Guardino, who has the most appearances as the sergeant, also appeared in Season 5's Forgotten Lady, playing a police official named Harris who converses with Columbo in a hallway. Very similar to Burke. Big deal, you might say. That kind of thing happens all the time on TV. Well, when Guardino returns for a blink-and-you'll-miss-it cameo in Murder, Smoke, and Shadows, he's never addressed by name, but is credited as Burke. In that episode, we also meet a guy named Archie Sewell, described by Columbo as a new detective and played by Stuart J. Zully, who then appears with the exact same trench coat in the very next episode, where Columbo calls him Burke. And in the 1993 episode It's All in the Game, Zully appears as the memorable Investigator Number 3. What is going on here? Everybody ready? Here's my official theory on Sergeant Burke, and I think it's the only one that makes sense in the context of the Columbo universe. There is no Sergeant Burke. When we see Jerome Guardino, it's really Harris all along. Zully's Burke is still Archie Sewell. Todd Martin is an anonymous sergeant, maybe even the unseen Sergeant Klein. It all comes back to Columbo. He's simply trying something new here. Tired of being doubted and slowed down by his sergeants, the lieutenant is assigning them a part. Sometimes a menacing part, sometimes a bland and officious one, but always calculated for maximum impact on the suspect. The Richard Allen Simmons era, during which Burke exclusively appeared as a named character, emphasized Columbo's gamesmanship. Here we see him take this game to a different level, utilizing the fictional Burke to keep suspects off balance, maybe even letting promising young detectives in on some of his tricks. Note the progression here. He works with Sewell, then assigns him to the role of Burke, and then gets him to help stage a tough interrogation scene in a later episode. So why didn't Burke ever return? Obviously, Columbo retired that strategy. His artistry, after all, is always evolving. This character, if real character he be, is a favorite of mine. But which actor do I prefer in the role? Who is the definitive Burke? Zully, while excellent, has only one official appearance to his credit. Guardino has the longer, uninterrupted streak in the part and gets the most total screen time, but for my money, you can't beat the menace of Todd Martin. While he says very little and does even less, his presence alone provides a sense of looming physicality, of the potential for violent action which the killers never fail to appreciate. Whether he's one man played by three men, or three men pretending to be one man, there's no doubt that he's the most trusted and reliable sergeant of Columbo's later career. Although we know little about him, it might be said that no sergeant truly knew Columbo like Burke.
Hi, Sergeant.
Hi, Harry.
Lieutenant Columbo and Sergeant Burke.
I'm Sergeant Burke.
Sergeant Burke.
Oh, Sergeant Burke.
Sergeant Burke.
Sergeant Burke. I think you wanted in your office. Something about Mr. Flanagan.
Oh, thank you. Lieutenant, I think there's something you should see.
Will you just wait here, please, Mr. Brands?
May I ask why?
Sure. Somebody will be along.
Hello?
Dr. Melody,
Yes?
this is Sergeant Burke. If I could talk to the lieutenant.
Sergeant Burke.